This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, John Cohlan, CEO of Margaritaville Holdings, on the enduring multi-billion-dollar brand of the late singer Jimmy Buffett.
We use the lyrics everywhere. So if you get out of the elevator of one of our hotels and you look to the left, you'll see a lyric. And those lyrics really are the way that are very helpful in preserving that culture.
Good day and welcome to the 585th in our series of distinguished speaker programs. I'm Harvey Bennett for the Economic Club of Florida. What a treat we have in store today. If you love music, Florida, and the entrepreneurial spirit, we have all three today in our speaker. He is John Cohlan, CEO of Margaritaville Holdings of Orlando. Yep, that Margaritaville, the famous song by singer Jimmy Buffett. Out of that one song, recorded back in 1976, has emerged a successful brand that adorns resorts, restaurants, and a variety of retail ventures. John Cohlan co-founded Margaritaville Holdings with Mr. Buffett 27 years ago, and he's with us right here today. John, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Tell us about Jimmy Buffett.
Well, that is a question that deserves a much longer answer than I could provide here. But what I would say is Jimmy was who you'd want him to be. Jimmy Buffett was completely authentic. And unlike most well-known people or celebrities, he really was who, as I said, you'd want him to be. He did all the things that he sang about and wrote about. He was a genuine, good person, more creative than most. Not only a singer, but a writer, a very successful writer, an entrepreneur, as we're here to talk about more today. But just a really good person who had more of an impact, quite honestly, on this country than many other people have.
His music certainly paints a mood. It speaks of the Florida lifestyle, and it's quite appropriate that you're based here.
Absolutely, and he was someone who basically viewed his mission in life as providing a good time for people. And he understood the importance of that, and he understood his ability to do it. So Jimmy, knew that life's tough, and everybody deserves a vacation, whether it's for 2 hours at a concert or on a real vacation. But he really understood the interplay between work and play, I would say.
Now, Jimmy Buffett passed away in September of last year, 2023, having accomplished all of those things and a slew of record hits. This business that you now are in charge of must be a living memory for you as well as a tribute.
No question. When we started the business together, he'd had a little restaurant and bar, T-shirt shop in Key West that's still around today, that was opened in the early 80s. The whole idea really was to extend what he stood for. And by the way, not to make it about a person, but to make it about a feeling. We like to say, he and I'd like to say, it was inspired by his life and his art and the way he lived his life. So it's very much about perpetuating the emotion that he stood for. And every day I'm reminded of him. And we have a radio station called Radio Margaritaville and listen to it every day. And his music itself transports one to a better place and a vacation state of mind. So it very much is a reminder of who he is, and that's the intention.
Let's get down to the business part of it. This is essentially a brand marketing company, which is a rather unique business model, isn't it?
It's in fact, our primary business now has evolved into the lodging business. And like many of the larger hotel companies, they've turned into brand management companies. And most people don't understand Marriott and Hilton will never own another hotel. So it's not as unusual. But in our case, what makes it very unusual is that we are in so many different businesses because this brand can travel to lots of places. given that it stands for an emotion as opposed to a single product, which is somewhat unusual and allows us to stay very focused as a company on the integrity of the brand itself.
Give us a flavor of what you're going to be sharing with the club in just a few minutes, and I know that includes some anecdotes with you and Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, I mean, I just to really tell the story of, as it's been titled, how this song turned into this business, and obviously that involves a lot of sort of fun memories of Jimmy and I together, and it's been a remarkable journey. But it's an interesting story because there really never has been a consumer business, based on a song and then extended intellectual property. So a lot of good stories that are part of the journey.
Did you and Jimmy ever sing together, maybe on a road trip?
Never sang together. He wouldn't have appreciated that question.
John Cohlan, CEO of Margaritaville Holdings, a pleasure and thank you. We're looking forward to hearing your upcoming presentation on Margaritaville, how a song became a brand.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, here's the president of the Economic Club of Florida, Katrina Roll.
So I'd now like to introduce the head table. I'm going to start far right, Marjorie Turnbull. Marjorie is a former Leon County Commissioner and Florida State Representative who dedicated her career to public service and education, including serving as Executive Director of the Foundation and Vice President of Institutional Advancement at what is now Tallahassee State College. She has earned numerous accolades for her leadership, including the Lifetime Leadership Award by Leadership Tallahassee and the Stan Tate Award by our club, Economic Club of Florida. Marjorie remains active in the community, serving on boards such as the Tallahassee Symphony and Big Ben Hospice Foundation, and she's a past president of our club. Dr. Jeff Sharkey. Jeff is the president and CEO of Capital Alliance Group, a leading governmental relations firm based in Tallahassee, representing clients across innovative industries such as SpaceX, Tesla, and Margaritaville Holdings. Wonder who brought John here today. Anyway, thank you. With over 30 years of advocacy experience and a background in senior roles within Florida's executive and legislative branches, Jeff has advised on international affairs, trade, and education policy. He holds a PhD in international development policy from Florida State University and lives in Tallahassee with his wife and 2 children. Daniel, who you've heard from, he said a little bit, but I'll say a little bit more. He is the North Florida market leader at Florida Blue, where he leads a hyper-local strategy to address the unique needs of communities from Tallahassee to Ocala. And with a background in operations, sales, and education, he has also served as an adjunct professor at Flagler College and is active on the boards of the United Way of the Big Ben and the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce. And at this time, I'm going to invite Jeff to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Katrina. Well, welcome. Thank you for the invitation, Jeff Sharkey. As I mentioned, I had the honor of doing a little introduction here, but I just want to set the stage here a little bit. It's a real honor to have John Cohlan here today. And it wouldn't have happened had not Marion Hoffman bugged the heck out of me for about a year and a half. And John's a busy guy, but he was very gracious in deciding to come. And so to set the stage, you've all got your lays on, which is super. It's got thematically going to feed right into this Margaritaville. You have to do one more thing before I start to the introduction. Everybody take the right hand, right, like this. Put it right on your head like this, right? And you go fins up, right? And that'll get it started. Listen, again, it's a pleasure, and I'm proud to be a member of the Economics Club. I've known John for a very long time. I'm a good friend of Jimmy Buffett's for 35 years, and have watched John and Jimmy grow this Margaritaville brand from a very simple song line, looking for a lost shaker of salt. And from those early days of really just a T-shirt shop and a small restaurant in Key West, you'll hear the story that John's going to tell about his partnership with Jimmy Buffett, iconic Florida musician, poet, writer, lifestyle brand unto himself. And John and his team have done a fabulous job, as you know, growing that brand to be one of the most iconic, most visible lifestyle brands, certainly in the United States and globally. And he'll give you that whole picture. I'm going to do just a really standard intro to John so you know his background, but I think it'll feed into how he has worked in partnership with Jimmy for many, many years to grow Margaritaville into something that's, everybody recognizes. And you don't have to keep your hand up, fins up, but at some point during the thing, he'll probably ask you to do that. So John Cohlan is the Chief Executive Officer of Margaritaville Holdings, an international lifestyle brand management company based on the intellectual property, songs, lyrics, books, and lifestyle created by Jimmy Buffett. Mr. Florida. The brand DNA is experiential and entertaining island escapism, broadly defined. John and Jimmy co-founded the business 27 years ago. The company's core operations are in the diversified hospitality business, including resorts, hotels, cruise ships, vacation and active living residential communities, vacation ownership, gaming, and restaurants. All of you probably had touched one of those at some point in your travels around Florida. Additional branded businesses include alcoholic beverages, lifestyle consumer products, on-campus college ambassador program, and the media with Radio Margaritaville on Sirius XM that is one of the most popular stations on that platform. The business generates approximately $2.3 billion of branded system-wide sales, attracts over 20 million visitors per year, and benefits from approximately $7 billion of third-party invested capital in its destinations. As a matter of fact, we had a nice chat this morning with the State Board of Administration, their pension fund folks, who are certainly very interested in the growth of Margaritaville and excited to hear about this Florida-based business is doing so well. Prior to joining Jimmy in 1997 to form Margaritaville Holdings, John held the position of Senior Vice President, Corporate Finance for Triarch, a publicly traded holding company comprised of consumer businesses including Arby's, Snapple, and R.C. Cohlan. John graduated from Princeton University. We've talked to him about doing this, though, while he's here. Attended the London School of Economics and graduated from Georgetown Law Center. So without ado, I think you'd be more interested in hearing what he has to say. Let me introduce my good friend, John Cohlan.
This is probably very impolitic to say, but 2 days ago, I was in Gainesville because that other Florida great educational institution is teaching a course on Jimmy Buffett, and that was really very fun. Jeff buried the lead there for a second when he said he was friends with Jimmy for 35 years. I will tell you, Jimmy didn't have many friends for 35 years. And Jeff was among a very small group of people who knew Jimmy, who Jimmy had enormous respect for. And it's very appropriate to be speaking to a Florida group because Florida was clearly so much a part of his life and the story of our business together. And he cared very much about the state, and whenever the state called, be it a hurricane or other issue, the question was always, well, how do you get to Jimmy to try and do that? Who are you going to call? And it was always Jeff Sharkey. So it's a real pleasure to be here at Jeff's invitation. He's one of the first citizens of Margaritaville. I thought what I'd do today is first show you just a little bit of a film clip to give you an overview of what our business is. Fortunately, Jeff hit a lot of the boring statistics, so we can talk a little bit about some of the more interesting aspects of having been Jimmy's partner for all these years. And the one other thing I would say, I was reading this morning about the history of this organization, and I noticed that it was related to the Chamber of Commerce. And that's also appropriate because not a lot of people know this. Jimmy loved the Chamber of Commerce. He loved the whole idea of the Chamber of Commerce. And he loved business, and particularly small business, which was one of the things that has made this so much fun over the years together, because he got you can't become as dynamic in these endeavors without the real enthusiasm. And he really loved everything that the Chamber of Commerce stood for in this country, so it makes it even more of a pleasure to be here. So why don't we run the tape and then talk about how much fun this has been.
We never sat down and wrote a business model. We never sat down and created a plan. It happened out of, I believe, the pure heart of us that needs to have a little fun, no matter where you are.
Margaritaville is the place we all want to escape to. What started as a song is now an experience. A way of living, not confined by any specific coordinates, but existing wherever relaxation meets fun. Margaritaville is more than just a state of mind.
I love that as a hospitality business, we're not just providing rooms and a good meal. People are really touched by their experience.
When John and I met, it was the fact that I know we've got a brand here and I don't know what to do with it. I said, I can't pay you what you make up there, but you can be a partner and you can work in Bermuda shorts. And he came.
The state of the island is oversubscribed, visitations are way up, and unlike most islands, this island is growing and growing very fast.
The escape starts with a stay, but now you can camp, cruise, and even own. Add it to the cart, receive perks for your loyalty, or hit the campus from backyards to ballparks, the airwaves to your taste buds. It's the lifestyle that fits your lifestyle.
We went to Margaritaville. You got to go to Margaritaville.
What is Margaritaville?
I'm going to go into the retirement business with Mr. Jimmy Buffett.
Everybody wants to go to Margaritaville.
Wasting away in Margaritaville.
Who's in the blender? That's the man that rode you.
You know, several Margaritaville resorts and communities have pickleball courts.
Let's do it, Margaritaville.
All right.
Cheeseburger paradise.
You ready?
Yep.
Really, it's kind of a brilliant idea.
Something that I never envisioned happening when I wrote that song in about 5 minutes on the 7 Mile Bridge. It just goes to show you that anything can happen in America.
So I will share a funny little thing that just happened, you know. I mean, I'm sure we've had special people, you've all had special people in your lives, and when they pass, you feel that they're still around. And there are these signs that happen every once in a while. Well, I was just watching this video, and I noticed that my name was spelled wrong in this video. And I said to myself, oh, that's coming from Jimmy, because I've watched this video many times before. And in a talk about the business of Margaritaville, where it really all began was that Jimmy was so annoyed that his name was being spelled wrong, which is pretty crazy. And what do I mean by that? So Jimmy was, as I mentioned before, an entrepreneurial guy, and there he was in Key West, and he was just getting going. And all of a sudden, he noticed that there were people in Key West selling T-shirts with his name on them with one T instead of two T's. And he basically said to himself, you know, I should rip myself off because other people are ripping me off. And that's really, you know, how this all started. And the song was written in 1977. And in 1983, he opened a little T-shirt shop. And then he opened a little bar. And one of the very cool things about Margaritaville is that, you know, brands tend to come and go. That's how it all works. But for, 50 years, there's a long history of people eating, drinking, and having a good time in Margaritaville. And as I reflect on the story of Margaritaville, one of the things that strikes me is that the founding fathers got it wrong, right? They basically said all men are created equal, and that's just not true. Jimmy, I don't know if any of you knew him or anybody here has been to a Jimmy Buffett show? Anybody ever seen a concert? That's great. Well, he was, and you can imagine how many times people have asked me over 28 years, he and I were friends and partners, what it's like, what's Jimmy Buffett really like? Well, Jimmy Buffett is exactly the person you'd want him to be, right? And it's great that so many of you saw the show, because all of this really comes out of the power of emotion and what you saw on that stage. And for all the things Jimmy did, and it's remarkable, the breadth of his accomplishments. One of my favorite statistics, obviously his success as a recording artist is well known, but one of my favorite statistics is there are 6 authors who've been #1 on the New York Times bestseller list in fiction and nonfiction. Hemingway, William Styron, Irving Wallace, Dr. Seuss, somebody I can't think of, and Jimmy. But of all those things, what he loved more than anything else in the world was getting on that stage and entertaining. And at the end of the day, it sounds very simple, making people happy. And, he knew he had that gift, and he was very judicious about it, right? He understood how hard life was and the importance of leisure in everyone's life. A leisure moment. And he was that guy to provide those moments. And he was a very adventurous guy and always wanted to do new things. And when he and I got together, it was clear to me when we met that he'd been thinking about, what if I could expand this idea of creating fun moments for people in their lives. And so the way this really started from the beginning was I'd been working in New York and came down to Florida. Our company relocated, and he and I became friends. He invited me to something called the New Orleans Jazz Fest. And I'd never been before growing up in New York, and I saw 100,000 people all having the time of their lives. And I just mentioned to him that, there could be something here. I was involved with a company, we owned some consumer brands, and all very Florida-based, this story, as you're about to hear. And we moved back to New York, and then Edgar Bronfman, who owned Universal down in Orlando, called Jimmy up, and to their credit, they said, we want to build a 25,000 square foot Margaritaville at the entrance to this big theme park. Now remember, there was no $2.5 billion of system-wide sales. There was one little bar. And Jimmy, who had a day job, was a very intuitive guy, and Universal wanted to license the name Margaritaville and his name. And he called me up, and he said, I don't want to license my name to Universal, but you said there's a business here, and as that little Bloomberg cartoon showed, and he loved that line, you can wear shorts and flip-flops. And he said, I can't pay you, but if you come down here, we can do it together. And so that began, it all began with that idea of doing that one restaurant. And one of my favorite stories was, so the restaurant gets designed, and it's time to go look at the restaurant. And again, Jimmy knew his persona, so we go up to Universal with all the executives, and they've got this great model built, and you get on your knee and you look through it at scale, and there's Jimmy in his shorts with his knapsack. And if you guys remember the great old El Exigente coffee commercials, where El Exigente tastes the coffee, this is the moment where Jimmy Buffett is looking at this big $12 million restaurant, and everyone's holding their breath. And he looks at it, and they say, what do you think? And there's silence in the room, and Jimmy says, well, it's great. It's just that I have one suggestion. And for those who've been to the Universal theme park, there's a bridge that goes over and leads into the theme park. And Jimmy looks at it and he says, is there any way you guys can tilt the bridge so the people will fall into the restaurant? God's honest truth, they thought he was serious for a second, and they all looked at each other and they said, well maybe. And he said he was just kidding. But that's what it was like. So in all those years, we laughed all the time. And the secret to why this worked so well, it was all about the emotion that he stood for. And only he really understood that sensibility. And, so from restaurants, we got into the restaurant business, and then it was time we extended into the alcohol business. And one of the things we always found was that corporate advertising agencies could never really catch what he did. And, ironically, I used to say to Jimmy that if he had the love of fine wine that he had and he hadn't become a rock star, he probably would have been a Madison Avenue tagline guy. Because if you think about it, change your latitude, cheeseburger in paradise, these are all great taglines. And in fact, he would write the chapter covers, the chapter headings to his books before he'd write the actual chapter. So one of the other stories I loved is we got into the beer business, which is kind of interesting, and Jeff was very instrumental in helping us do that, because to understand the breadth of his impact, Corona, which most of you are familiar with, and what its imagery was, Corona really started like it was a Dos Equis beer. And what happened was they wanted to sponsor the Eagles tour, and Jimmy was opening for the Eagles and happened to be in the office when Corona was there, and he said, "So, clear light bottle. I'd like them to sponsor my tour." And fast forward, all of the imagery you've seen with Corona over the last 25 or 30 years, the seaplanes, the parrots, the beach, that all came from the fact that they'd sponsored his tour. So we ultimately go into the business and we create a beer called Land Shark based on the fins up. And the guys from Budweiser come down and give us a taste and show us the bottle. And in the old days, Jimmy and I actually went into an office in Palm Beach every day. And I said, "Hey, Jimmy's next door. Why don't you go in and show him, let him taste the beer, show him the bottle." They do. They get back in their cars. They go to the airport. They head to St. Louis. About 3 months later, they call me up and they say, "Okay, we've come up with the tagline for the beer." I said, "Great." I said, "What is it?" They said, "It's let the fin begin." I said, "That's really good. That's really good." I said, "This is the first time, and we've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years, that someone else has come up with something that I think really works." And they said, "Well, John, you don't know the history?" I said, "What are you talking about?" Well, when they went in, and then I picked up the phone and called Jimmy. And I said, well, first, I'm messing up the story. First, they said to me, "You don't know the history." And I said, "No." When they went in with the bottle to Jimmy, he signed the bottle for them. And he said, "Let the fin begin, Jimmy Buffett." So they just used his line. And to show you how in the moment Jimmy lived, because one of the great things about him is he had no rear view mirror. Okay? So Jimmy was forward. It was tomorrow, right? And if you ever had a disagreement with him, which didn't really happen often, and you were thinking about it after the conversation, that was your problem, not his, because he had moved on, right? And he was always about tomorrow. So, and by the way, and one of these students 2 days ago made the observation, which I thought was very, very perceptive. When I asked these kids, I said, "So you've been studying Jimmy Buffett now for, a few months. Tell me what you think, what really strikes you." And this one very intelligent woman looked up in the class and she said, "He seems like a really humble guy." All right? And that's actually really very true. So I called up Jimmy. I was so excited that we had this line, "Let the fin begin." And I said, "Jimmy, you're not going to believe it. I mean, I know Budweiser, big company, but I think this is a great tagline they came up with." And he said, "What is it?" And I said, "Let the fin begin." And there was a pause. And he said, "You know what? That's good. I really like that." He said, "Good for those guys." I said, "Jimmy, you don't remember?" He said, "Remember what?" He said, that was your line. He said, no, man, no wonder I liked it so much. But to shift gears for a second to the business that has been created here and how unique it is and what it tells you about, I think, the American consumer. So, as Jeff mentioned for a moment, you could have seen in the video, what businesses are we in? Well, we're in the hospitality business in a very, very broad way. We are a true lifestyle hospitality company, so what we like to say is, however you like to lodge, we can provide that opportunity for you. So we're in all-inclusive resorts, we're in regular resorts, we're in select service hotels, we're in the vacation ownership timeshare business, we're in the vacation cottage owner rental business, we're in the cruise business, so all forms of lodging hospitality. We are in the restaurant business with about 30 brands, 150 different restaurants. We are in the gaming business, we have a few casinos. We are in the media business, a radio station with 9 million listeners. We are on the college campus business with, we're on about 200 campuses with a college ambassador program. We are in the consumer products business, from blenders to bicycles. Suffice to say, the point is that Margaritaville brands more different things than any company in the history of commerce, right? Now that's interesting, right? You know, how is that? I've thought about it a lot. And the answer, I think, tells you more about Jimmy than anything else. Most brands are defined by the product they brand. So Evian means water, right? You're not going to buy an Evian plate, right? And when Jimmy and I got together in 1997, the song written in 1997, right? The song written in 1977 had obviously been out for 20 years. There was a small restaurant in Key West and a bar, but truthfully, most people didn't know it existed. But at that point, because we did the consumer research, I did, there was about a 50-60% awareness of the word Margaritaville. And when you said Margaritaville to people, what did they say? They said, oh, it's a great song, it's that guy Jimmy Buffett, it's the place I want to be, it's a hammock. They knew what it was, but no one said, oh, it's that restaurant in Key West. So Margaritaville had a product. It had a product. And the product was an emotion, right? So you had something that people knew and it stood for an emotion. And the lesson of a lot of what's happened here is that an emotion can travel to many more places than a product, right? So the reason we can be the #1 coconut shrimp in America in your Publix store, and also the leading active living brand where you want to go and spend the back 9 of your life at a Latitude Margaritaville destination, is because Margaritaville stands for an emotion. And that emotion is something that is based on the fact that he was such a unique person, and through his music and really the way he lived his life, everyone said, I want to live that life. It was all very, very aspirational. And it was an intentional decision we made. I mean, if you go to our places, you won't see Jimmy's name very much, because we both understood that a business based on a person is going to be more ephemeral than a business based on a feeling. And so what we intentionally did was create the feeling that he stood for. And it is simply remarkable when I think about the power of what one person created. You know, there's the great man theory of history, which is, you know, I don't know, would slavery have ended without Abraham Lincoln? You know, probably, because there were the forces of nature and progress. But if Jimmy Buffett had never been around, none of this would have happened. In other words, there wouldn't just have been another Jimmy Buffett. Jimmy Buffett wasn't just something that was going to happen in life. It really was about a person, and none of it was by accident. The other thing worth noting about him is, you know, the image, of course, is, you know, in a hammock, flip-flops, but this doesn't happen unless someone is driven and cares. And the truth is, Jimmy would wake up every morning, and Herman Wouk was somebody he loved, and Herman Wouk once said to him, a page a day. Right? So he was always, and I think Jeff knows this because he'd call everybody with all kinds of ideas, he was always wanting to do something new, and he had an incredible work ethic because the brand of escapism that he represented and that we extended, you know, to escape, you have to escape from something. And what Jimmy stood for was the idea of escaping from a job. And in order to escape from a job, what do you have to have? You got to have a job, right? And so what's really so interesting about him is his reverence for the sanctity of work, right? Work was very important. I'll tell you another very funny story along those lines. It was my 50th birthday party, and he came and had a tequila or two. And he said, you know what, we had a local band. He says, I'm going to get up and play. I said, great. And he says, and I'm going to do something that I never let anybody do. Because the holy grail for Jimmy was the set list, right? Because there was nothing, as much as he loved our business and loved his family, there was nothing more important to Jimmy than getting on that stage and delivering the experience for that audience. And of course, the set list was part of that. Even though there were 8 or 9 of the songs were the same every time, the set list was the holy grail. So I'm going to let you pick the songs. It's your birthday. I said, that's pretty good. I said, well, you know, the song I always loved was a song called "It's My Job." Now, it seems like some of you are familiar with the song. "It's My Job" is about the sanctity of work. Right? And he looked at me and he says, oh, okay, it's your birthday. He says, I'll play that song, but I didn't write it. Oh, Jesus. Mac McAnally wrote the song, and from then on I always knew to check and see who wrote the song. But it was a real constant in everything we did that he appreciated the people who did what they did day to day, the people who really were responsible for making the business work. You know, I would, in the early days when we'd open a big restaurant, I'd want him to show up at 5 o'clock somewhere, get the press to come, and this is what he would do, and it's so instructive. He'd say, no, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to show up before the place opens, and I'm going to go into the kitchen. And what he would do is he'd go into the kitchen and he'd sign the apron for everyone who was working in the restaurant. And he was coming back to the observation from that student 2 days ago. He was this incredibly humble person who had so much appreciation for the life he lived and was so positive about everything. And it really does go to the point of the power of positivity. And it also applies, by the way, to how he ended his life. You know, Jimmy ended up with a very serious form of skin cancer, and he had 4 good years. And one of his very best friends, someone who's in the sort of the Jeff Sharkey club of old friends of Jimmy's, was a doctor. And he went through the whole process with him. And he called me up and he said, John, you know, I'm a doctor and I deal with people dying all the time. That's what I do. And he also had his own issues. And he said, I have learned so much from Jimmy about how to deal with the process of dying. because he really had this attitude, this incredibly positive attitude. He was just so grateful, for the ride that he'd had. And it was, on a personal level, just remarkable to see. And it's just, again, to this idea that all people aren't created equal. This was someone who, most people don't live up to their billing. And he really did. And, the beauty of what's been created here and that will continue to expand is what we really do every day is we try and communicate that same idea of, enjoy the moments of life. And from a business perspective for a moment, one of the things that we've found that makes the biggest difference actually is having, if you're being hosted in a hospitality environment by people who are having a good time, you're much more likely to have a good time. So we pay an enormous amount of attention to the attitude of the people who work for us, because we want them to be having a good time. We say it's kind of not a fair fight. Would you rather work at Margaritaville or at Marriott? It's a lot more fun to work at Margaritaville. And it's interesting to watch and see. We take surveys of our employees every year, and we actually ask the question, do you love your job? And 94% of the people say they love their job. And one of the things he understood as well, I would always say, Jimmy, it's great when you show up and it makes such a difference. And he would say, hey, I understand why this works. This works because people really have a wonderful experience when they come. Again, to his humility. But it was, if I could leave you with any thought about Jimmy and the business that we created together. By the way, we never fought, laughed all the time. And, how lucky for me what an incredible ride to be able to have had him as a partner. But I think that Florida was, as I said before, incredibly important to him. And I know many of you probably have relations with the government, in the state government. And one of the most beautiful things, and Jeff was so helpful to us, was the tribute renaming A1A. I mean, I can tell you, first of all, the two most famous coastal roads in America are the Pacific Coast Highway and A1A. And Jimmy traveled A1 all the time. He liked to drive, by the way. He really liked to drive. We'd say, Jimmy, why don't you get a driver to go down to the Miami Heat games? There's traffic. No, I like to drive. Okay. And renaming that road, I don't know if many of you know the story, but Jeff arranged it, and we came up to the hearings. And normally, when a road is named after someone, they take a little piece of the road. And I can't remember the name of the chairwoman of that committee. She was fantastic. I don't know if you remember her name. Yeah, what's her name? Fiona McFarlane. Really impressive woman. And she said, normally what we do is we name a little stretch of road. But we had a problem this time, because when we said, okay, we're going to name a little stretch of A1A after Jimmy Buffett, all the legislators raised their hand and they said, we want that stretch of road to be in our district. Right? And so she said, we've done something here that is completely unprecedented. And we are going to name A1A from Key West to Georgia, Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway A1A. Wow. Yeah. And what's so remarkable about what the state of Florida did, right, is, as I sit here and share my frustration that Jimmy really, he was such a special person that in many ways I don't think it's fully recognized. Now you think about, George Washington, there's the George Washington Bridge, there's the FDR Drive. I mean, it's an unbelievable legacy to have that road named Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway. And 50 years from now, there will be all these great songs and all these great resorts and all these great restaurants. Hopefully some of them will still be open. But I'm convinced that the real lasting legacy, the most lasting legacy for Jimmy Buffett is going to be what the state of Florida did in renaming that road. So, a thank you to all of you who are influential and participate in what the government in this state does, because it's incredibly meaningful. I'm probably going over the time, so anyway, those are my... Sure, yeah.
So we have time for just a couple of questions. Lisette has the mic. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, oh, good.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I could hear you talk for hours.
I could talk for hours on this topic.
Jimmy has a special place in my heart. My dad and I bonded over his music as I grew as a child. Went to the Keys many times. My question is about Jimmy embodied a culture in the corporation that you all have now. With his passing, all of us will eventually pass. How do you keep that culture, that heart, that compassion that he had going into the future?
Right.
So it doesn't become a corporation that is just saying one thing and doing another.
Right. That's a great question. But first, to address another of your comments about how it was in your family, right? So truthfully, Margaritaville and Jimmy were family entertainment. And the reason this is so powerful is it was passed down from the baby boomer generation to the next generation. And the stories are innumerable of families who were brought together, okay, by Jimmy. And one of the things he always used to say is and we used to talk about is, life's hard, right? Your kid, ends up doing things you're not thrilled about, right? And you say, what's the best memory you had in the year as a family? And the answer is invariably the vacation, right? When you're on vacation. And Jimmy was as you're nodding, I'm sure it applies, Jimmy was the soundtrack to those vacations, right? How remarkable is that, right? To be the soundtrack to the great memory. And, I use his lyrics all the time, as we do. And one of my favorite is, it's a permanent reminder of a temporary feeling, right? And so in any event, that's a big part of what we do. But to your point about the culture, so one of the things that's helpful is the average tenure of our team is about 20 years. So nobody leaves Margaritaville, why would you? So all of those people, knew him, and so that's a great base for the culture. The other part of it is, while we don't use his image, because, as I mentioned before, we wanted this to be about a feeling, what we use everywhere in everything we do are the lyrics. And one thing I would say that I feel bad about is, because of the success of the business and how unique it was, because there's never been a celebrity or, a song or even a person to have this type of success, that makes it notable, right? So that's what people write about often. And in a way, it's overshadowed, to a certain extent, his brilliance as a writer and a performer. And one of the things that I like to highlight, because it was a great moment, and it was a great moment for him, though he might not necessarily have admitted it, is about 7 or 8 years ago, Bob Dylan did an interview in Rolling Stone magazine. Bob Dylan, he gets because Jimmy never got airplay, really. Jimmy never got the critical credit he deserved. He was admitted to the Rock and Roll of Fame just recently, and that was 20 years later than it should have been, in my opinion. But they asked Bob Dylan, who are your favorite songwriters? And he listed 3 or 4 songwriters, and Jimmy was one of them. And he cited He Went to Paris and Death of an Unpopular Poet, which was really wonderful. But the point being that we use the lyrics everywhere. So if you get out of the elevator of one of our hotels and you look to the left, you'll see a lyric. And those lyrics really are the way that are very helpful in preserving that culture.
I'm turning 40 next year, and my birthday theme is how a pirate looks at 40.
That's great. And you know what? Since there's a book called A Pirate Looks at 50, you can use it when you're 50. You get a lot of juice out of it.
I think Doug had a question. Oh, okay.
Hi. Yeah, I really have more of a kind of a hope, not really an admonition.
Great.
For you, but I just couldn't help but thinking you've just done such incredible things with what Jimmy Buffett and his work product everything that he projected, as you say, lifestyle and all. I'm just incredible.
Appreciate that.
To be congratulated for that. But I can't help but worry now that he's gone. And talk about maybe de-emphasizing his image. I just couldn't help but think about Walt Disney. And I know that there'll be disagreements here. I'm happy to always to stand up for any of my positions anytime anyone wants to pursue them, but I think the corporatization of the Disney brand after Walt Disney passed away was regrettable in so many ways. And I think they departed from the kind of image that allowed him to connect with people and made the Disney brand a transcendent brand in our culture and around the world, really. And I just am concerned over time about making sure, as best you can, that that kind of a fate doesn't await your own work that you're doing now. And I think Jimmy Buffett's image, not just his lyrics, but who he was, is really an important part of this. And I think, frankly, your whole presentation today has done a great deal to underscore that reality. Okay, he's gone. We can't keep him, but we can keep more of him and keep his image and what he meant and how he connected with his lyrics and how his lyrics came to be. We can keep that more alive, and I just think my own hope is that you will try to do that. I predict that if you do that, instead of just following the corporate, immediate urge to go and exploit the name and image for this profit today, if you resist that and stick with the core of this, you'll last and ultimately make the most profits of all. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I would appreciate the comment. I really do want to clarify one thing. When I talk about not using his image, that was really just not using his face. He and I, we both felt very strongly that what was much more powerful, image should be broadly defined. The image is of what he stood for and that as his art. Now, I would tell you that your concern is very well founded. The part of the answer is, so long as I'm alive, I'm not concerned, because he was my partner and friend, and I know that won't happen while I'm doing it. But you make a very good point, which is that these things go on. I will tell you that we've always tried to be true to what he stands for, and sometimes you can make the point best by explaining things you didn't do, right? So we were called one time by a very sharp guy, very successful businessman, and what he wanted us to brand, Margaritaville dental offices. It should be fun to go to the dentist, right? You go in, you get a margarita before they drill you in the mouth. We decided not to do that. So I do want you to understand, we just don't stick our name on anything. We are careful about it.
Quick question for you and Jeff. Who would you like to see play Jimmy and Moody?
Yeah. No. Well, the only way I'll answer that is the friend of his who was the biggest movie star of all his friends. He's a wonderful person, is Harrison Ford. Not that he would play Jimmy, but Harrison made a beautiful tribute when Jimmy died. I think that'd be pretty tough, in fact, to your point, it would be hard to imagine anyone who could really do that. Yeah, pull that off. Unless you have a different answer.
John, I
sure.
want to thank you. First of all, this is a phenomenal presentation, a phenomenal story. Jimmy is truly exceptional, but so are you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That you've really built upon his legacy in a very smart way. Little insight. Does Jimmy have a special message on his tombstone, and what might that say?
Jimmy does not have a tombstone, but his ashes, he wanted to be spread, and I hope I get this right, some in Pascagoula, where he was from, some in Key West, I believe, some out on Long Island, but only little bits. So where did he want most to be, and where are most of those ashes going? Anybody want to try and guess? This is pretty cool, actually. Outer space. Yeah. The ultimate explorer. What? Oh yeah. Jeff asked me. I have had things happen that I do believe Jimmy's here. I do believe he's getting a kick out of this. But Jeff asked me to tell the story, which was when he died. By the way, his last words to me, and I saw him the day before he passed away, were, because I said, hey, what, anything you want me to do here? We've created this enterprise. And he looked at me and he said, Johnny, I'll be back. All right, that was pretty good, right? Well, 2 days later he passes away, and I'm up in the Finger Lakes with my family, and it was, of course, only Jimmy would pass away on the Friday of Labor Day weekend, right? So, and as you guys know, the governor was good enough to make that Friday Jimmy Buffett Day. I mean, how perfect is that? So now Labor Day becomes a 4-day weekend, right? And we celebrate it that way. I'm going to continue to. But in any event, so 2 days later when he passed away, I had all my kids up in where I spend the summers. I'm in a little town called Skinny Atlas in the Finger Lakes, and every Labor Day weekend all their friends come up and we're having a big party. And my wife asked me if we should still have the party. I said, of course we should still have the party. That's exactly what Jimmy would want. And no kidding, we lived up there for 20 years, and so I get up to give a toast to all my kids' friends and everybody at the party in Jimmy's honor, and I look up, and there's a double rainbow, right? There had never been a double rainbow, right? So, again, all people aren't created equal, and I'm just, remember Jimmy was born on Christmas Day. It's hard not to think that, he's not still with us, yeah. So anyway, thank you. One final comment. Jimmy always said he was a shameless entertainer, so I'm not going to miss the opportunity to ask all of you to go sign up for your Margaritaville license plates.
You know what? Listen, I thought you were going to say fins up. Your presentation was phenomenal.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for all that you shared. I mean, I was kind of getting emotional a little bit over here, too. But we have a token of our appreciation for you for taking the time to come and speak with us. And thank you again. Let's give him another round of applause.
You've been listening to John Cohlan, CEO of Margaritaville Holdings, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on November 21st, 2024 in Tallahassee, Florida. For more information on Margaritaville Holdings, visit margaritaville.com. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com. This program was recorded at the Champions Club at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida.